I'm just some crazy guy with a camera that has no idea what I'm talking about. There's no evidence to back any of this stuff up. Wink, wink. So I'll tell you what I did. I looked into some of the current happenings that's going on with AI. I documented that. And then I listened to what the people are saying. Because again, nobody can answer the question about what AI is actually going to be used for. Because when you look at the actual data and what they're saying it's going to be used for, it doesn't add up. So I went out and I scoured the web and I found all of the theories that people have on this topic. And I documented those. And I'll just tell you that the last theory is pretty darn crazy. It's actually kind of shocking, a little bit scary. But we're going to go through all 5 of these. I found 5. And oh, by the way, as I go through this, I'm going to try to remove all bias and conjecture from this conversation and just focus on the facts. So I'm not really going to give my input about what I think about this stuff. It's just going to be what I have observed. And I want to hear y'all's input on this as well. I want to know which theory do you think is most plausible? And it doesn't have to be just one. It could be numerous theories. Maybe it's a combination of all of them. But I want to hear y'all's input on this. But the first thing that we need to do before we dig into the theories is talk about some of the stuff that's happening that doesn't add up. So here's a big one here. So Coweta County, Georgia. Okay, they're implementing eminent domain and they're trying to take over 330 private properties to expand the power out there. And all that power is going to be basically funneled straight into a $17 billion data center project. It's called Project Sail. It's going to take up 830 acres. So the people that basically have eminent domain forced upon them, some of them are actually filing lawsuits against the county and against the state for trying to take their property. Because to those people in Georgia, this doesn't really make any sense. They're putting this AI infrastructure above the people. They're willing to take their land and they're willing to put their power and their energy grids at risk to power this data center. It just doesn't add up for these people. It doesn't add up for a lot of people from what I'm finding. And there's another project that's happening. It's called, I don't know what this one's called, but it's happening at Lake Tahoe. And basically what's happening here is that NV Energy is now telling the residents of Lake Tahoe, there's about 49,000 of them, that they're going to have to find their own source of power. Because come, May 2027, they're going to stop providing 75% of all electricity, and they're going to basically redirect that to data center projects. Kind of sounds very similar to the thing happening in Coweta County, Georgia. And this one's kind of crazy because the energy prices for these people out there around Lake Tahoe has already risen 77% since 2022 because of AI infrastructure. Again, this is another one of those situations where the power grids are basically being stressed to the limit. They're putting these data centers and the AI infrastructure over the people. It doesn't really add up. And another thing that's happening is in Utah. You might have heard this one, but in Utah, this was just recently announced. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, all right, he just announced that they're going to be breaking ground on a 40,000 acre data center project. 40,000 acres. Now, when I first read this, I was like, there's no way this can be true. It has to be made up. People are getting the numbers wrong. Something's not right. But I did a lot of research into this, and it is actually 40,000 acres. That is 62 square miles, roughly the size of Washington, D.C. This is going to be a data center compound. And this apparently went to local jurisdiction there in Utah, and the people traveled from all over to protest this. But apparently the decision was already made before they even had the hearing, and they approved it. So it's going to happen. And this is going to use 9 gigawatts of power once it's totally done. Now keep in mind that the entire state of Utah, all infrastructure and all residences combined only uses 4 gigawatts a year. This is going to use 9. It is going to use natural gas, and it's supposedly going to be emitting 35 million metric tons of carbon emissions every single year. The entire state only emits 55 million metric tons a year. So it's going to raise the state's emissions by 64%. That also doesn't really add up to people, because when you think about that, what have we been hearing for the last couple decades? Climate change. We need to reduce global emissions. But now we have a single data center. This is just one, keep that in mind, that is going to be emitting that much more carbon emissions. But now that doesn't seem to matter. So we have to ask ourselves, why is this infrastructure more important? And another thing about this is that they want to use floating solar panels and other renewable energy sources to power this thing. And in order for them to install enough floating solar panels in the Great Salt Lake to power this giant data center, it's going to take up another 40,000 acres. But that's going to be 40,000 acres of the lake. And what they're saying is that that amount of solar panels would cover 16% of the lake's northern arm. And this lake has already dropped, I think, 20-some percent over the last, I think, 2 decades or something like that. But again, that doesn't seem to matter. And when you really dig into all this stuff that doesn't seem to matter anymore, it gets even crazier, because from the research I've done, we'll go through some other stuff here. All right, so most of these data centers, and what I read was 80 to 90% of these data centers use water in some capacity. And when they use water, 80 to 90% of these data centers pull it from a water source. That could be a lake, a stream, a well, an underground aquifer. It doesn't really matter what the source is, but it's always going to be a natural source of water that these data centers pull from. Now, some of that gets recycled and it gets put back into the environment. Some of it doesn't. And some of the water that is recycled and put back into the environment is discharged as wastewater. Now, it's supposed to be clean before it goes back out, but that is not necessarily the case with all of this stuff. And from what I read, a medium-sized data center uses around 100 million gallons of water a year. All right. A large hyperscale data center uses around 1 to 5 million gallons of water per day. And all of the data centers here in the U.S. currently use a combined total of 449 million gallons of water per day. And what makes that even crazier is that the water that's discharged back into the environment, a lot of that is discharged back in the form of water vapor. So it doesn't necessarily go straight back into the ground. It just evaporates and it goes back into the water cycle. So the problem with that, though, is that these data centers use water at a rate that is much faster than it takes the natural water cycle to replenish the water supplies in the ground or the lakes or the streams. So what happens is these natural water supplies end up running dry. This also doesn't make sense to a lot of people because, again, certain things that supposedly matter or are supposed to matter suddenly don't matter when it comes to AI. And when you think about the amount of power and water that's currently being used for these AI data centers, that is only powering and supplying water to 5,500. That's roughly about how many there are in the U.S. Now, over the next 4 years, there are supposed to be more than 12,000 of these data centers in operation. They're investing over $5.2 trillion into AI infrastructure over the next 4 years. That's pretty wild. So that means that all of this water is going to be consumed at much higher rates. That means that all of this power is going to be rerouted and consumed at much higher rates. That means our natural resources are going to be stressed. It means that our power grids are going to be stressed. It means that more people are probably going to be displaced. It means that more farmland is probably going to be consumed. That means that less food can be grown. And it also means that there's going to be more carbon emissions. Because the crazy thing about all the power that's being used is a lot of the current power infrastructure And the energy plants that are in place, they run on coal-burning fuel. So that's a lot more carbon emissions. So that leads us to the multi-million-dollar question, and that is, what is so doggone important about AI that these people are willing to put everything at risk in order to scale it up? What is so doggone important that they're willing to invest $5.2 trillion into it over the next 4 years? This is where things get interesting, because this is where the theories come in. And the first theory that I found is that maybe AI is a big nothing burger. Maybe they're investing all this money into it and it's just going to amount to nothing, because they're already saying that AI is not going to be profitable, and it is not profitable, and they think the bubble is going to pop. So maybe that's exactly what happens. Maybe they think that this is going to go somewhere, and they're putting all their stock and money and resources into it, thinking that it's going to amount to something spectacular, and maybe it just fizzles out. Maybe all these big AI data centers just become big ghost towns, and life continues on as normal. We've seen waste like this happen before, so I guess it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that's going to happen. So that's the first theory. The second theory is that AI creates automation and efficiency, and it improves everything at such an unprecedented rate that it creates absolute euphoria and a utopia. And we enter a technological revolution. Everything becomes easier. Life as we know it is just basically easy. I mean, we literally enter a golden era, and everything's done for us. Robots come in and they take care of all the work, and we don't need money anymore because everything's so efficient and everything runs so smoothly, and we all just kick back and we can do whatever the heck we want, and we get a universal basic income check, and we're free to just explore and live life. That's the second theory. And maybe that is an actual, very real possibility, because if AI is everything and more that they say it's going to be, and they end up scaling it to artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, AGI, maybe that's exactly what happens. Maybe we just enter an era of abundance, and life as we know it completely transforms, and everything that we ever wanted comes true. Now, theory number 3 takes a little bit of a different turn. Okay, so theory number 3 would be that we end up creating the most powerful and the most unstoppable military and defense system on the planet, and the U.S., and I guess you could say whoever masters AI becomes an unstoppable force, and they just rule the world. They take over, because when you have that amount of power and that amount of knowledge and resources at your fingertips, you've basically just won the game. And maybe that's where we're headed. Maybe we're headed towards a technological revolution, but not just one that is more efficient, one that's more powerful, one that allows the reigning force to just conquer the world. And maybe that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Maybe it means that that reigning force and that ultimate power ushers in utopia. Maybe they usher in all the great stuff that I was just talking about from theory number 2. Maybe it leads to a new world order, and, everything just basically changes for the better. And maybe that ultimate power, finally, after all these years and all these decades, ushers in flying cars, zero gravity and robots, and all the cool stuff we've been promised for 50, 60 years. I guess that's a possibility. But theory number 4 takes another very sharp turn. And this one's a little bit more dystopian. This one is all about surveillance. So the theory here is that AI is basically going to be used to usher in a surveillance state. Everything's going to be policed. It's going to be very dystopian, kind of like 1984. Our every move is going to be watched and controlled and dictated. They're going to move to the digital dollar and the social credit system and the carbon credit system. And there's going to be all this AI technology integrated in our cars and our homes with smart meters and kill switches, and basically we'll just be surrounded by technology. Maybe we'll even have technological implants. And if we misbehave, or we go over our carbon allowance, or we do something that they don't like, they shut us off. They turn off our cars. They don't allow us to drive. We have mileage limits. We can only go so far because of the climate and carbon and all that stuff. Maybe the power grids are stressed so much and we're all blamed for it. So they limit us, using our heat and our air conditioning to a couple hours a day. And because so many people are displaced because of all this stuff going on and, these data centers and all the technology taking over our land and our property, most people out here in these rural areas will be forced into 15-minute cities. And our every single move will be watched, controlled, and dictated. We won't be able to leave. We'll have everything there in our 15-minute city that we could ever possibly want. And that's the new reality. That's the new world. And from what I've read about this theory, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Again, maybe that's a place of abundance. Maybe that is a crime-free world, because everything's monitored. You don't have to worry about crime because if somebody commits a crime, it's on camera. And a robot is dispatched or a drone is dispatched and it takes out the criminal. And we don't have to worry about anything. Everything's handed to us. We're in our 15-minute city. We don't have to go anywhere outside of that. We have everything in those cities that we could ever possibly want. And life is just all grand. Everything is taken care of for us. That's how some people view it. Other people, on the other hand, view it a little worse than that. They view it more dystopian. They think that it would literally be a real-life version of 1984, and some people simply don't align with that. But nonetheless, that is the going theory for theory number 4. And theory number 5 is quite a bit more dystopian, and I would say actually apocalyptic. Because theory number 5, this one gets pretty wild. What this one is about is that AI is quite literally going to replace us. Not in the sense that it's going to force us out of our homes and our land and it's going to take our jobs away and do all the stuff that we would normally be doing. It's not going to replace us in that way. It is going to replace us because we quite literally won't be here. And what I mean by that is that there is going to be some sort of catastrophic event, some sort of cyclical catastrophe that happens and it wipes out the vast majority of the population. And the going theory here is that this is one of those things that happens ever so often and there's really nothing we can do about it. It's just the way the world works and it's kind of the luck of the draw. And when I really dove into this, I could see how that would be a possibility because there is evidence of that throughout our history of some sort of cyclical catastrophe, basically wiping everything out and then it starting over and building back up. And that event, that process basically happens over and over and over. There's a lot of text and literature that points to this. The Bible is one of those things. And a lot of ancient texts from even Egypt and the Mayans, and I would say just about every civilization across the world, they all talk about some sort of event that happens and wipes everybody out. And the one that you'll probably recognize the most is the flood, the Great Flood. It's referred to as different names throughout different cultures, but all cultures talk about the Great Flood. So maybe that is what we're going to be facing. And something else that ties into that theory, as I research this, is that people believe that's a possibility because maybe that's why all these bunkers are being built. You got all these rich billionaires and stuff making these big bunkers all over the place and are digging tunnels and stuff. So it could tie into that. Maybe that's why there's such urgency to scale AI to the moon over the next 4 years because it's going to happen soon. And the whole reason for AI is because it's going to replace the people that won't be here. They need something to keep the system going, the economy going, and they need something to keep the world turning, basically. And AI will be the thing that does that. And as you research this theory, it also kind of makes sense because maybe that's why there's this big push for fake meat and fake food. And maybe that's why you've got planes flying over blocking out the sun, because maybe there's something actually happening that they're trying to protect the world from. Maybe that's also why they're diversifying AI and the infrastructure for AI so much. And they're putting it all around the world in all these different places because they know that there's a very good chance that a lot of it's going to be wiped out. So the more they put out there and the more diverse they make the geographic locations, the better chance that this AI has of surviving. And maybe that's also why they don't care about displacing us right now. They're willing to put everything at risk and stress the grids and push the people out of their homes and use our natural resources and take over our farmland and use our water and, all this stuff and put carbon emissions into the atmosphere and all this stuff because they know it doesn't matter. They know that it's all in vain because something is going to happen, and it is imperative that this AI infrastructure is there so that they have something to keep the world going. And also maybe so that they can use AI to figure out how to stop it or to figure out how to build back, because maybe they believe that that's the only thing that's smart enough to find a solution. And the more I dug into this theory and researched it, I found that there were a lot of people talking about the Great Replacement Theory, talking about the population reduction. There was stuff referencing the Georgia Guidestones and a Deagle report, and the elites of the world talking about how by 2030 there's going to be a massive population reduction of like 70%. And all this stuff's theory, but it's there. And I just want to present to you what I found. Now, whether or not any of this stuff's true, again, there's no telling. And I'm not going to tell you my opinion. It really doesn't matter at this point, because what I think is more important than all that is to just take all this information in. Look at the theories that are being put out there, because from those theories and from all of the stuff that is actually going on, the physical things that we can see, I feel like that we might actually be able to connect some dots, and we might be able to form our own theory about what all this means, about what the end game is. Because, again, right now it's all unanswered. Nobody knows for sure. So the more that we know and the more information that we can consume and the more that we pay attention, the more that we will, at the very least, have a general understanding of what could be coming. Because I do think it's very important to understand and know what is coming. That way we can prepare. Because whether or not the bubble pops, or we enter a state of utopia, or we enter a surveillance state, or the world ends up ending, in any of those scenarios, it's going to pay to be prepared so that no matter